say something there so we can confirm audio?
Hello,
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Sunny, who is joining with you today?
We have two others joining. Jen and Rayma is going to be our main presenter. Rayma is joining as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm gonna hit record on the Zoom. We're not live yet.
Perfect. Good evening, everybody. It is June 9th, 2025 at 6:01 p.m. and I'll call the session of Audit Committee for West Sands Regional Municipality to order. Committee, any declarations of conflict of interest this evening? Nothing. Perfect. Announcements. Anybody have anything to announce? All right. We have the agenda. If it is okay and nobody has anything to add, we'll look for the approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Whedon. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Megan. All right. Well, perfect. Thank you very much already. We do have the minutes from December 5th, 2024, January 22nd, 2025, and February 5th, 2025. They were circulated in your packages. If there's nothing to be corrected, we'll look for a motion to approve those. Moved by Councillor Yanish. Seconder. Councillor Whedon. Thank you very much, guys. All right, we have two presentations this evening. Our first is the West Sands Regional Municipality Audit Plan for fiscal 24-25. We have Andy Forrest from Kent and Duffet with us, I believe, to outline the plan.
Yeah, can you all hear me?
We sure can, Andy. Thank you very much.
I've had a few issues with my camera today on other calls. I was trying to do a restart, and I don't know if it's going to let me use my camera or not, so I apologize for that.
That's okay.
But thanks again for having us down for audit planning. As per usual, we incurred really no difficulties in the planning process, other than my schedule, I guess. So I think we postponed this meeting by 1 week. And that was because of me, and I appreciate that immensely. I've been off actually for the month of May with medical reasons. And I don't know that I would have been able to present last Monday night or not. So I do appreciate that. But our team was in sometime over the last couple of months, a couple of times. And what we do in the interim process is really, well, there's sort of the beginning stages of an audit where we do a lot of documentation about things that may have changed, updates from prior year of issues that maybe we wanted to follow up on, any changes to sort of the operations, staffing. So we do a lot of sort of information gathering that way. And we also do a lot of preliminary testing. The primary focus of our preliminary testing, I would say, would be around the control aspect of it. So we don't we don't audit your internal control function. That's a separate engagement altogether that not many municipalities would have unless there are problems identified or significant problems. What we do is we evaluate your internal control process in two forms. We evaluate the design of your internal controls, and then we evaluate whether your controls are operating as intended. So you've got a beautiful control system, and then we've got to follow up to make sure that it's actually operating as you've designed it. A really key example, and this does touch on a couple of really tiny things we found last year. A really good control design is having two signatures on every payment you make. Now, a signature can be handwritten, of course, or there's electronic signatures these days as well. So a really good and strong control around expenditures is having two signatures or two approvals in place. So that's a great design. So then we go through and test that part of it, and we evaluate whether it's designed well. And then we do a sample of testing to make sure that we've determined or not whether you're operating as you've designed it. So last year we found 2 or 3, I think, internal control deficiencies where checks weren't double signed. And that's actually quite common. The fact that I hadn't seen it in the first number of years that we've been here is probably more the exception than I would have than finding it last year, because oftentimes people who are signing checks are given, dozens of checks, and sometimes they're stapled together or paper clipped together. And especially when they're paper clipped, it's very easy for 2 checks or 2 bundles to be signed, get attached together and just get missed. That's all it really is. So, but that is sort of what we do primarily in the early stages in the testing phase. We also do some I call them interim testing. So it's not about controls, but we will take a sample of, I don't know, 25 to 30 of just, we'll take invoices and payables, and we'll do some actual tests on it, of details on the accounts, just to get a sense for how things are going in terms of possibility for errors. Maybe we want to do more testing during the final stages of field work, things of that nature. So if we go in, and I'm going to use some jargon here, I apologize. If we do some number crunching, and if we see, oh, look at that, your road maintenance appears to be considerably higher than we expected, or snow plowing was considerably higher than we expected, then we'll do a sample of testing. It's just a small one, but it's really not perform, not to get evidence as much as it is to help us design where we need to do more testing or less testing when we come back in June and July and August, or whatever the schedule will be. So we did that as well, and we didn't really find anything in that planning that led us to believe that there would be significant errors to watch out for later. Things were pretty much straightforward and according to plan. There's always a few areas that have variances, of course, but nothing in our sample of testing led us to believe that those variances were incorrect at this stage. And that's really a bigger part of the risk analysis process. So if I'm going to give you the Coles Notes version of the interim audit, we would do risk assessments, and that some of that is done just by, qualitative analysis and what areas are higher risk than others, but also there's that quantitative analysis as well that we do that does provide some basic level of testing, but primarily it's for risk assessment. So we can help design our procedures for the year-end process. And again, like I said, sure, there's numbers that are a little bit different this year to last year. There's a few new areas, of course. There's been some consolidation in the utilities in the last few years. That will change our process slightly, but overall, our plan is to be fairly consistent. To years past, it's been a pretty effective audit in terms of gathering sufficient and appropriate audit evidence. So we didn't really feel much need to deviate from that plan that we've had in the past. There will be some extra work around. There's some new accounting policies coming out or effective in the coming days and months and years. So we'll talk with Carly about those as well and make a plan for presentation there. And of course, with the utilities combining over the last few years, we'll have some extra work around that. But that's not based on something that we found was inappropriate in testing. It's just because of new circumstances there. So generally speaking, because the internal controls of West Hants have been so strong in the past, we have been able to rely on those controls during the audit work. So rather than me looking at, say, 100 invoices from your payables and expenditure sections, we can reduce that maybe down to 30 to 50 range, probably in the 50 range this year. And we also do testing on your controls during the audit process at year end, and that will give us some audit evidence as well. So it's a bit of a hybrid approach between tests of details. So we look at your actual invoices and matched to what was recorded to make sure that the amount was accurate, amounts recorded are complete, and that amounts recorded are existing in the sense that we don't have fraudulent invoices being paid. We don't have things that are double posted, things of that nature too. So we do our basis of testing around those kind of areas, accuracy, completeness, existence, and in other areas, there'd be some estimates and measurement there as well. But the higher risk areas get more testing. And as you can probably guess, expenditures would be an area for higher testing because there is some incentive there. We've never encountered any instances of theft or misappropriation of assets, but where there is an incentive for personal gain, we do more testing around those areas as well. Higher level testing around capital assets just because of the quantitative nature of them. They're large balances. Receivables would be another one. If we were to see, just as an example for the committee, if your receivables balance were growing and growing and growing, especially as a percentage of revenue, that could be an indication of a misappropriation of assets, actually. So maybe some theft was happening and it wasn't being knocked off the receivable balance. So that receivable balance growing is an indication of possible fraud. So we do some testing around that as well, a lot of analytical work. But other than that, we don't really have any major changes to the audit plan this year. I'm not sure if the committee knows, but every 3 years, every accounting firm gets inspected by the Institute, which is a governing body of ours. And last year was our inspection, and they picked West Hants actually as the file to one of the audit files that we did, and it was given like a 10 out of 10. Really, it was given glowing remarks on our audit process and the audit evidence gathered. So we didn't really feel a whole lot of need to change that since we'd sort of been given the green light in terms of our process and our planning and execution stages there as well. So that was sort of the very basic gist of our audit plan. Certainly you'd hear me talk a lot more at the next audit committee meeting. I know I do tend to ramble without much of a breath, but if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to address what I've spoken about or anything else about the audit process that might be enlightening or informative to you or management.
Thank you so much, Andy. Any questions, committee, to Andy on the plan? Anything on your end, Director Rashawn?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Sorry, the mic's really far away. So thank you, Andy, for presenting your plan again to the audit committee folks. This is just another year, but this was a year of significant change, as the auditor had said. So we consolidated our water utilities as of October 1st. So we have a lot of mapping that we had to do as part of that. The Utility and Review Board didn't order a stub audit, so there will be some preliminary work that we'll be going through, I'm sure, with Andy, as he mentioned, due to the circumstances, just a little bit more testing around closing balances last year, balances that have merged, and then closing balance this year. But the other thing that also came into effect this year is our accounts receivable policy. So that is something, again, I do anticipate we'll see some comments around that as we're working through that process as well. I don't have anything else to say, but thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Andy. Appreciate it. Look forward
Yeah,
to
and
the.
it's really
the
nice that when we come in or the team comes in, we do get a ton of cooperation, which we really appreciate. We couldn't ask for better assistance from staff because sometimes we might do the exact same thing or fairly similar, 4 years in a row, and then the fifth year, just because of maybe a new standard or just a slight change in reporting, that we might have to do something that's a little bit different. And a lot of times when we encounter that, we get some pushback from management. And just because they think we're, it's different, so that must mean something's wrong. But we've never really encountered that with West Hants, and we really appreciate that. I know Carly and Diana in particular have been very helpful to us throughout our process. So I just think that should be worth mentioning as well.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much. All right.
Question.
Oh, yes, Councillor Yanish.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Through you to Andy. Do you ever do any work in examining the budget process? A lot of what we're talking about here so far as, relates to many businesses, but in a municipal government, the budget process gets to be really important. And I'm just wondering if you ever do any work in auditing portions of the budget process.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I guess I'm not muted, no. We don't audit the budget itself. In fact, on your financial statements, there's sections where it would say unaudited, in fact, but that's kind of a funky concept itself because the Institute sort of provided guidance to say you can't audit a budget because there's no actual transactions there, just sort of an estimate of what you're going to spend. So I don't really have much of a source document to verify your budget against other than what was approved. And that we certainly do. We certainly verify that what we have on the financials was what was approved by council. But you're asking more about the budget process itself, and we don't really go through the nitty-gritty details of the budget process in the audit process. What we would do is we do have to, as I know this might seem a little strange as the auditor, but we do have to analyze or sort of provide an overview of your risk management process and your control process. So we talk about the controls every single year because they're of the utmost importance, but risk management is also important. And if I felt like you were not properly assessing the risks, I would have to report on that. And I know that sounds a bit strange, but allow me to expand. So if I thought you had a crumbling infrastructure, of course you don't. But let's just say there was in my opinion, there would be a possible huge liability that you wouldn't have sufficient funding for because of, your roads were falling or whatever it might be. Then, and you didn't have the ability or the processes in place to do that risk management, then I would provide that in my internal control letter or my management letter at the end of the audit. Same thing with controls. If I found that you didn't have proper controls, I report on that. So I do have to report on it only in the function of the risk management process and the control process. And to me, and I said this a few times over our time together, I find the budget process to be one of the absolute key controls. I know it doesn't sound as strong as maybe double signing of checks or proper approvals or authorizations, but a meaningful budget process is so important to the internal control and risk management function of the municipality. So while I don't go through the actual steps of the preparation of a budget, I do go through a sort of an evaluation of whether you have a meaningful budget process in place that includes preparation of meaningful numbers, follow-up, investigation, monitoring, and things like that. So it's not, I don't know if it's exactly the detail you were referring to, but we do sort of on a qualitative nature evaluate your budget process just to see if it's a meaningful process that could help you, prevent misstatements from happening and also sort of identify and help you form action plans for the risk management process.
Well, thank you. No, that is helpful. I yeah, it wasn't clear to me at all how much you looked into that process. You given some valuable information there, I think, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. And what I guess just to be extra clear, like if you have a budget line, and I just keep using snowplow and salting as an example. Let's just say you had a budget and it said $250,000. And then, every year it was $250,000, but you were always spending $500,000. Well, I don't have, it's not under my mandate to tell you that your budget is inadequate. and that line. I don't go through line by line and do a numbers analysis. Mine is more about the functionality of it. And that sort of, just so in case people out there think, okay, well, he should be looking at these numbers of the budget to make sure they're accurate and reasonable. That is definitely not part of the financial statement audit, just to be clear on that one.
Megan.
Sorry, just two questions to clarify what, for Director Sean. You said the URB did order stub audit. Is Kent and Duffett doing
No,
that?
they didn't.
Oh, they didn't.
No,
Oh, okay.
so it'll be consolidation. So for the first, from April to September 30th, it'll be separated. And then we consolidated them and joined them together on October 1st. So it'll be a little bit more work for Andy and his team to test to make sure that those balances track through from last year when they were separate to when they're combined at the end of this year.
Okay. And then the second one was what is the AR policy that you're referring to?
Yeah, so we would have had that as part of our presentation here at our last meeting regarding our policies and procedures. It's a relatively new policy, and it gave basically a mechanism for us to manage our AR. One of the things that we did not do previously was charge interest on AR. So council gave us the authority to charge interest similar to that of taxes and water. So that has definitely led to a lot of cleanup and a lot of people coming forward. So that's kind of the thing that we'll be probably seeing Andy and his crew testing this year as we're going through it. It also gave the director of finance some authority to clear off outstanding balances, because we do have some significant, I say significant, a significant number of old invoices that were paid, just weren't cleared because of how the system works. For like $8 dog tags and things like that from like 2008. So these are the things that we would have taken right at the counter. So we know that they wouldn't have generated had they not been in the counter. But at that time, when they were using the system, they didn't know that they had to go in and apply. And so there's a lot of that we're cleaning up now.
Good. All right. Perfect. Thanks so much, Andy. Appreciate it. All right. Our next presentation committee is Water Operational Audit, MNP. I believe we have Sunny, Jen, and Rama.
Rayma. Yeah,
Rama. Sorry. Yeah.
that's right. Thank you so much. So good evening, everybody. Met some people on here, but I'm Sonny McDougall. I'm a partner with MNP here in Sydney, Nova Scotia. So also on the line today, so I serve as the relationship partner for this engagement. Jen Hayes is on the line. She's the engagement partner that ensures that the engagement will meet the objectives that we set up for. And Rayma, she's the important one because she's the actual person doing all the work for you guys. So I'm going to hand it over to Rayma to do a presentation. And if you have any questions, you can ask either one of us. So I'll pass it off to Rayma.
Hello, hi everyone. I'm just trying to get my screen to work, but I'm just gonna go. Hi everyone. My name is Rima. I'm a manager within the enterprise risk team based out of Toronto. I'm also the project manager for this engagement that we have with Westhans. So as part of our presentation today, we'd like to walk you through mainly the three main agenda items that we'd like to cover today. One of them is the engagement objective for the operational review, the approach that we're going to take, and also kind of shed a bit of a light on the project management aspects that we'd have as part of this engagement. Starting off with the engagement objectives. So there are three main objectives that we look to address as part of this operational review. So one of them is understanding the current state with respect to the processes, the specific processes listed here. So one of them is starting with revenue, the meter readings and billings process within there, going into accounts receivable, customer payments and account adjustments, and then financial reporting. And then the other two areas are compliance with board orders and then staffing resources. So essentially, I would say our our engagement, the current state phase, is going to focus on understanding these processes from start to end. Not only the financial reporting or financial controls in here, also the operational controls. And then in the second step, which is the identification of gaps and opportunities for improvement, what we do is once we've gone through our walkthroughs, we've discussed with management what the process is, understood from start to end how a given process works. We kind of take it back on our end, do some sort of SWOT analysis and assessment with respect to the risks that we've identified in the engagement, and then identify what the gaps are, and also provide some sort of action plans for you to work on to implement and improve upon the existing gaps, if any identified. And then the third objective of this engagement is assessing the current staffing structure and growth projection. So the focus of this objective would be mainly to understand how is the staffing at Wisconsin right now, how many people, and essentially help you build a tool that's going to help you project, if you need to increase any sort of staff based on the increased workload. And then just to address that, we'll be building out a model to share with management. One thing I did want to note over here with respect to the process and controls review, that element is I would say, very specifically focused on the 2 years, which is the 2022 and 2023 fiscal years. Of course, we are also taking into account when we're coming up with any gaps or opportunities, how things are operating right now before we provide any sort of recommendation. But our samples are the samples that we would test with respect to the operational controls or financial controls that we identify are going to be very specific to 2022 and 2023, but also our solutions or our action plans are going to be very much considering the current operations that Wisconsin has in place right now. So with those 3 objectives, our approach is actually in 4 phases, starting off with project initiation. So as part of that, we have a kickoff call. We confirm any needs and expectations. We'll put together a project plan and schedule, identify any key milestones or timelines, establish any project governance and status update protocols, then request and review some select documentation from the stakeholders for us to understand what are the existing documents first thing, and also what are the current processes before we go into some of the stakeholder engagement meetings. And then going into phase 2, understanding the current state, we conduct stakeholder engagement sessions with respect to each of the areas highlighted in the previous slide, map out the key steps in each process in a process narrative format, and that we essentially have a process narrative, identify what the controls are, and also any areas of improvement that we see, and then develop essentially, at this point, we're also starting to see some of the gaps or areas of improvement, and we start articulating that within our documents. And then that's when we kind of move into phase 3, where we start validating whatever the gaps have been identified with management. So it's kind of how we like to see it, as a playback of what we've understood in terms of the processes and controls that are in place. And then phase 3 is kind of focused on putting together the recommendations report, finalizing the report, and then presenting the final report with the recommendations. And then phase 4, it's kind of a phase that is a bit different from the phase 1 to 3, but it does start concurrently with I would say, phase 2. In this phase, what we're going to focus on is collecting information to be able to build out that staffing model for the future, right? We're going to have discussions with key personnel to gain any additional insights. What are the inputs that would go into that model? And then, of course, we develop the Excel model to identify any resource requirements. And then as one last step on that one would be to develop a final report with the recommendations relating to staffing levels, and hand the Excel tool to Westance for future use. So that's essentially what our approach would be. On an ongoing basis, and this is just, I would say, this is more so an example for you to see that on an ongoing basis, I would say a bi-weekly basis, we'll be meeting with management to provide them the status of the project, how we're progressing, what have we completed, what are the steps that we have planned, what has been accomplished, what has not been accomplished, anything we'd like to flag for management to provide information on, any potential issues and warnings that management, if management should be aware of. And then on an ongoing basis, this is essentially an example of what we'd present. So it would show phase 1, 2, 3, 4, and whether we're on track, whether we need certain, I would say, assistance in terms of helping us push a couple of things along, or if there's any delays, then that's going to show up as attention in red. I think, beyond that, I think that's kind of a short presentation of the objectives, our approach, and project management. So I guess my team, if I've missed anything you'd like to add.
Thank you, Rima. The mayor had to step out and he passed the chair over to me. I'm Councillor Whedon. Thank you for your presentation. Does anyone have any questions for Rima?
Rima, before we get into talking or further questions, I was wondering if you could talk about some of the testing that you guys are planning on doing around this project and around that year.
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the things that we would be doing as part of our testing is once we've understood the full process, identified what the controls are, we're going to pick samples for the year in audit, the years in audit, so 2022, 2023, kind of pick some samples and actually do a detailed test to see whether the operational controls, along with the financial controls that are in place in that process, are operating effectively. So not only just test the design, but also test the operating effectiveness. And if there are any gaps, we'd flag that as part of our report.
So if I can just add to that, sorry, thank you, is that, to her point, Ray's point is that, we first do a test that it's working the way the design or way we're being explained the design works. And then that would be, a very small sample of testing, but then a larger sample of testing would be done to make sure that now that we understand that that's the way the controls are designed to work, that they're actually working on a regular basis. So to be, statistically proven number of samples taken, and that test will be done based on that. It's very similar to what your auditors talked about from the first part where he talked about testing your controls. That would be to test that the controls are working the way you're describing them, but then we would expand that to make sure that they're working on a regular basis.
Thank you, Sonny. Councillor Yanish.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just on the matter of the key stakeholders that were involved in this process, I was just wondering if there were any water customers that were included in that in the process.
So I would say as part of our, you're talking about whether we'd be meeting with the customers, if I understand that correctly.
Yeah, somebody that receives a water bill regularly from the municipality, would they be considered a key? Could they be considered a key a stakeholder?
So the key stakeholders would be more so understanding what the process is at West Hans, but I think as part of our samples, yes, we would be picking some of the water bills, is what I would say, to be able to test to see, if there are any issues or any concerns. We're also going to look into, let's say, if there were any specific bills flagged as part of complaints as well. So that's also a part that we'd look into, but not necessarily having a direct conversation with the customer, but kind of testing it from this side, that if there was a complaint filed, how is it handled at West Hans?
All right, thank you.
Megan, go ahead.
I just wanted to go back to the staffing resources piece. And I don't have the presentation, and I'm going to try to remember, but I think the outcomes of that, or the deliverables of that, was to provide an Excel spreadsheet or look at future growth projections, and then determine an appropriate, I guess, staffing levels. And I guess I would take that as based on the assumption that the current staffing levels you're assuming are accurate. And I just wondered if there was any benchmarking in terms of staffing complements here, or is that going to be part of the scope?
So I guess, sorry, is anyone else saying? Okay. Yeah. So you're talking about whether there would be any sort of benchmarking that we're doing again.
Yeah, like in terms of size or roles, or I guess I just, and maybe it's back to maybe it's a question for the counselors here. I just don't know if that's really achieving what the scope of what we were trying to do there is, because I thought it was around whether or not we had sufficient staffing levels. And I think that work, like that approach, assumes that what we have now is accurate.
So we would, we would look into what your current staffing levels are. So as part of our discussions and our meetings with management, we would look into and understand. I would say we would get the appropriate data, right? And that's kind of I would say, a big part of it. Kind of get the data. What are the inputs that are going into it? That is, how many people are currently working in a team to serve. I'm just going to take meter readings as an example, right? Meter readings are done by how many people, right? Right now you've got maybe, I don't know, 1,000, 2,000 houses that are being served by maybe 3 people, right? So the ultimate goal would be to, and I'm talking very specifically on a specific topic, but let's say, you were to grow from 2,000 to like 4,000 or 5,000 or 10,000, right? So how many people are you going to need to serve that big of a population, right? And I think that's kind of how we're going to go about it. We're going to look at where you're at right now to see, okay, if currently are there any gaps or inefficiencies, or whether the staffing level is appropriate right now based on the current size and scale, right? And then also kind of give you a tool that you can use yourself to kind of project and build out as things change. Like as your size grows, as you grow, you'll be able to use that tool.
Yeah, if I can just add a little bit on that. So benchmarking wasn't in our scope of work, and understand that that might be a valuable exercise to see sort of ratio of staff to houses or to meters. That wasn't part of our scope of work specifically. However, as we're going through processes, we're also looking for efficiencies, and we're giving that some thought in terms of the actual work that needs to get done and the number of people that you have in the department and doing the work. So, we're not going into depth there, but we're looking for efficiencies, and we're if there's something blatant, we'll certainly flag that. As well, just to build on the model that we're building, there will be sort of toggles, if we can call them that, so that as your if you change the way that you do the work, if you add some automation, if you add less frequent readings, however that works, you can build that into the model. So as you grow, it doesn't necessarily mean, for every 1,000 houses, you need an extra person. It could be, a different kind of function than that. So we're building that into the model.
Yeah, that would be that'll be great to have. I guess just a follow-up question. Can you elaborate a little bit more on how you would determine staffing levels currently are appropriate? Like, what does that look like for you?
So really it's through interviews. And so the data that we're gathering around, volumes, interviews, how the work is being done. And when we're looking for efficiencies, part of that is, financial efficiencies, but some of it is just sort of operational in terms of how things are scheduled and the way work is done. So we make some estimates. The scope of what we're looking at isn't diving into that specifically. So we won't get super granular with that, but it is a lens that we put on if there's something that seems excessive, I guess is the word.
And just to add to that, when we did this, that one part of the RFP was that optional item.
Yeah.
That we left kind of in there, knowing that we had development oncoming, knowing that we're growing. That was that item that this kind of speaks to. And as I was meeting with Sunny and Jen and Ramya, I was like, we also got to look at efficiencies internally as well. So again, that's kind of where they're focusing, which is kind of part of the stakeholder meetings that they're talking about and interviewing staff and talking about what they're doing and what do they have on their plate and what do they do on an average day, and then kind of go from there. Again, looking at the internal controls and the processes to recommend efficiencies, because if we can create efficiencies, then it looks different in that ending model as well. So.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Yanish.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Throw this out to everyone, I guess, but it's my understanding that audits can be often divided into operational audits and financial audits. And I was wondering if you could help clarify what the difference is. And as part of this process, how you weighted those two components in your approach to this work.
Okay, I can start on that. It's a good question. So, and it's a great timing with your financial statement auditor just finishing his presentation. So, so his objective is to provide a report in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards, and that's a standard financial statement audit where he's making certain assertions and giving an opinion, basically that your financial statements are free of material error. The difference, I guess, I mean, we see this as kind of a unique thing. This is an operational, we kind of more look like it as an operational review versus audit, but we're using audit techniques to do the operational review. So we're essentially, if you remember when he talked, he said that your audit is a hybrid of test of controls and substantive tests of details. So if you think about what he said, we're building on that test of controls. So we're focusing mainly on you testing the controls in the sense of, are they providing you the proper controls from an operational point of view? So we're not giving you an assurance that they're working properly to provide you materially free financial statements, because that's a completely different function. You'd have to, for example, your test, if we were doing test controls to satisfy financial audit, I'm just throwing a number out there, we might have to pick 500 sample items to get statistically to that result. Whereas for an operational review, we wouldn't do nearly as many to satisfy ourselves that your processes are operating the way you described to us. The controls are operating the way they've been described to us through all the stakeholders, and whether or not they're being effectively operating. So I think, and I'll let Raymond and Jen kind of comment on this, but we kind of see this more of a review using audit techniques, if that makes any sense to you.
Yeah. I agree with Sunny. And just to kind of add on to that, one of the things, like it is a review with audit techniques, but I think like a big difference between operational and financial audits usually is that the purpose of an operational audit is to evaluate efficiencies and effectiveness of your processes and controls from start to end. Whereas a financial audit is a bit more focused just on the accuracy and fairness of financial statements. So from our lens, it is an operational review. We use the auditing techniques there for sure. And we understand the entire process from start to end, whether there are controls relating to operations, whether it's financial, whatever the key controls are, we are going to test it using auditing techniques, but it is an operational review. So
yeah, I'm a mechanical engineer. I'm not. so I look at the moving parts and organizations, and Sunny and Rima look at the numbers and the controls. So we make a good team when we're looking at how do you make things work smoothly, that you're reducing waste, but you're also have the appropriate controls in place so that you're doing the same thing the same way every time.
And if I could have one last comment on it, to kind of put it in perspective, is that your financial statement audit is giving you assurance that your numbers are right. They're not really outside your management letter, it's not really telling you that you got there in the most efficient and effective way. And that's kind of what we're doing is that we're looking at your operations saying, yes, you may or may not have gotten to the right numbers. That's your financial audit. But the risks that existed operationally, we're going to identify those and those gaps that say that they should be improved to reduce the risk. Because at the end of the day, I mean, the financial results are what everybody's looking at, but how you get there is what we're looking at.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Any other questions for our panel? Director Rochon?
Yep. And again, the operational audit was stemming from the overarching questions that were presented through council, and then of course here at this committee. So we have been chatting with Sunny and the team about the credits and all of those bigger items that kind of resulted in this. So that is an area where, of course, I've identified that I'd like some extra testing and some extra work done. So that is another area where they're going to come back with some assurances.
Yeah, great point. We should have brought that up. Is we are aware of some of the issues in the past, and we need to know that, of course, to design our approach and clearly look at what caused it, what changed since then, and that was to our point earlier that we are looking at 22, 23, but we're also looking at the current state as well before we give recommendations.
Thank you, folks. Thank you, Sunny, Rima, and Jen. Anyone else have any comments or questions at this time? Well, I guess that's it for you folks. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Sunny, you look like you got a beautiful view behind you there. Is that Sydney Harbor? Where are you?
Sydney Harbor. Yeah.
Right on. Right on. Well, thanks again, folks. We'll be seeing you soon.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
bye. Take care.
All right, folks, moving along on our agenda here, we'll go on to our director's update from Director Rochon.
Thank you, Chair. So not a lot. It's going to be a verbal update this time, but I just wanted to let you folks know that we've received the draft of our 23, I believe, FCIs. They're hoping to have them out soon. So just wanted to give you guys a heads up that we may meet out of our quarterly schedule. I'm hoping that we'll have the MNP report late July, early August for review. So it would be good to have probably a meeting sometime in August. I know that's a tricky time, but we'll have our FCI updates, and then we'll also have our year-end close, which is still ongoing as well. And we're looking at getting our auditors in hopefully the last week of July. So looking at that schedule as well. So they'll be starting their on-site audit work and testing, not their auditing plan. So just giving them a little bit of time here. That's a little later than normal because we're going based on the recommendation last year, just to take a little bit longer on our end, which does work within their schedule as well. As I believe one of the auditors is out the week before the last week of July. So that actually worked pretty good. So those are the quick updates that I have. And we haven't done anything further on our update with the financial system. We have done a couple demos. However, we will be hopefully including that in next year's budget to start that process. So we're still working within this system this year. And just as another quick reminder, I believe this is also, we'll be going out for RFP this year as well for auditing services. So I think this is the last year of the contract. So those are just quick updates that you guys will see.
Thank you, Director Rashawn. Any questions for Carly? Megan, go ahead.
I just was wondering when we would be seeing, I think the last financial results that we've seen were September's. We haven't seen December's yet.
In our January meeting, we would have had February meeting, we would have had December's.
I went back through and I don't believe we did have them then.
Okay.
I was expecting to see them this time, but
Okay. I'll double check there. But we'll make sure that that's on part of the next one. Yeah.
Anything else for Director Rashawn? And we'll move on to correspondence. And I believe we did receive one letter. No. Then we'll go to our public comment. Anyone from the public comment from anyone? No. Well, that wraps up what's on the agenda. We just have a motion now to, could we have a motion now to go in camera for a couple items? And folks waiting at home will come back at the end of our in camera period. No, we won't be coming back at the end of in camera.
Through you, Chair, I think if there are no motions, we can adjourn the public portion of the meeting.
Okay. So we don't expect any motions coming from in camera. Okay. So I guess, folks, we won't be back. So we'll be going in camera for some, thank you, Councillor Yanish. And second it. Thank you, Megan. And thank you, folks, for joining in at home. And we'll see you for our next meeting.